hopefully you guys have been able to log into Passageways. There's a lot to cover today. So I've just got the meeting minutes up. So I'm going to roll through those. Oh, being live stream. Okay. So I'm going to start with the meeting. So I'll start with a call to order and a roll call. So Ms. Heather, could you do a roll call for us?
Absolutely. Let me make sure I get this back up so I can see it. Hey, Mr. Colby Burks.
Here.
Dr. Kelly Ellis.
Present.
Mr. Eric Ferris.
Here.
Hey. Chair Lucas Minzer.
Here.
Mr. Richard Nelson.
Here.
Mr. Madison Silver.
Here.
Ms. Elaine Walker. And that is all.
All right.
We have quorum.
Super. Thank you all very much. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. The minutes are in Passageways. I always want to say board book or on board. It's Passageways now. Do I have a motion to approve as presented?
So moved.
So moved. I'll second.
Moved by Mr. Ferris, seconded by Mr. Silver. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, like sign. All right, those pass. The next item on the agenda is, let me look at I thought I had it, the executive budget. I believe that is going to be presented by Sean and Bill. Or is Bill here? Or Sean, are you going to cover that?
I will cover it, but Bill is here.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to start something out before I let these guys do all the detail.
Sure.
I do want to tell this committee that the budget they're getting ready to tell you about is going to be the House budget and the governor's budget. Both are very advantageous for post-secondary. The governor basically, in a nutshell, gave us what we asked for and then a little more. The House almost gave us what we asked for, a little less, but we're going to hopefully work with the governor's budget to get us there. So I'm very thankful to the House and to the governor for really doing their part to let people know that higher education matters. I had a chance to be on the governor's press conference, whereas we really connected all those things that we're doing with the outcomes that we feel as a council and for higher ed that's important to the state to grow. So I did just want to say, I won't take any more time. I'll let Bill and Sean go into ad nauseum with you. But I did want to give like a general statement to say that the budgets, I think, are we just have to get the Senate to go along with it, maybe even think a little bit stronger of us, who knows, but that's our goal. So thank you, sir.
Very welcome. Thank you. All right, Sean and Bill, take it away.
Happy to go over this material for you. Of course, there's materials in your board book, or in your packet.
There you go.
If you can see my screen here, we are going to look at the House and the executive budget at the same time. So just as a reminder of the timeline, CPE staff submitted the council recommendation, which was approved in early November. We submitted it formally on November 15th. That's the statutory deadline for submitting in agencies and the post-secondary institutions budget recommendation. We did that through the state budget system. The House budget was introduced on Friday, January 7th. Unprecedented way, it came before the introduction of the governor's budget, the executive budget, which was introduced on Thursday, January 13th. That was the 8th legislative day. The statutory deadline for the governor to present his version of the budget is the 10th day. But the very good news is that both budgets provide much needed funding for higher education, consistent with the CPE recommendation in very many ways. This is a kind of a busy chart here, but I'm going to go through it. I'm a spreadsheet guy, so I'm going to use this first, and then I have a more wordy summary of what's contained in the CPE recommendation, the House budget, and the executive budget. So you can see for operating funds, CPE recommended performance funding of $67.5 million in the first year of the upcoming biennium and $90 million in the second year. The House budget provided $50 million in the first year and $50 million in the second year. The executive budget did not provide any funding for performance funding, but it did provide $67.5 million in the first year and $90 million in the second year as a general fund base increase. And so that increase is applied on the institution's funds that are available to educate students. So it backs out debt service and mandated programs. And the increases, and there's more detail in the materials, exactly how much the increase was for each institution in the executive budget. Both the House and the executive budget went along with CPE's recommendation to maintain the pension subsidy at the 21-22 level, at the current year level. So that was very, very positive. Under mandated programs, CPE recommended funding for the KSU land grant match, $671,500 in the current year, which is not shown, but in each year of the upcoming biennium, $671,500 in the second year. House and executive budgets include that funding. The House budget includes $6.1 million in each fiscal year for UK agricultural extension agent salary increases, presumably a cost of living adjustment. There's $6.1 million in each year for that. The executive budget does not include funding for that program. The U of L Center for Military Connected Students funding is included in the House and executive budget, $300,000 each year for that program. The EKU Center for the Arts, $200,000 is included in just the first year of the upcoming biennium in the House budget. It's included in both years in the executive budget. And on the capital investment front, CPE recommended $350 million in the first year and $350 million in the second year for asset preservation. The House budget went along with that recommendation, provides $350 million in general fund cash funding in each fiscal year for asset preservation. The executive budget provides $500 million for asset preservation. The House budget, $700 million. The distribution was slightly different than what CPE recommended. We recommended 10% of the base funding to go to each institution, and then the remaining funds distributed based on BFA study identified need. And the House budget, they looked at category 1 and 2 square footage from our funding model and distributed the funds based on category 1 and 2 square footage. So education in general square footage minus lab space.
And you provided as attachment B to each of your agenda items, those allocations, correct?
I did, yes.
Yeah, so it's in your packet, and it's council members may recall in terms of the $350 million each year recommended by CPE staff and approved by the council. We went ahead and included the debt service. The first year is one full year of debt service on $350 million. And then the $50 million, $434,000 in that second year for debt service was the $25 million, $217 carried forward for the first $350 million plus another year of debt service for the new $350 million. But as you may recall in our agenda item materials, we recommended that the asset preservation pool could either be cash funded or bond funded. And what the House and executive budgets have determined is the best approach is to cash fund or provide general funds for asset preservation for the upcoming biennium. That's why you see zeros under debt service, under the House budget and executive budget.
The executive budget provides 500 million using the same math that we use, the same approach, 10% base amount, and then the remaining funds distributed based on VFA study need. The other big difference, the House budget asset preservation funds only need to be matched by UK and U of L, the research institutions, and those institutions have to match 25 cents on the dollar, as opposed to the 50 cents on the dollar that CPE recommended. The executive budget goes along with our recommendation of 50% match, and then it does add some language that allows CPE to grant a waiver to any institution that is having a financial hardship in meeting that match requirement. So just some nuance in the asset preservation dollars listed here. Oh. And then under new construction and renovation, the governor's budget does include over $1 billion for capital projects, either new construction or renovation projects. And each institution, each university has their top 2 construction or renovation projects included in the budget. KCTCS has 3 projects included in the budget. And the governor's budget debt finances that $1 billion, and there's the associated debt service. And then finally, under trust funds endowment match program, we recommended $60 million for Bucks for Brains to be shared all of the universities, 50 million for research institutions, $10 million for the comprehensive institutions. The House budget provides $30 million, 15 million in each year. But our understanding is that it is just for UK and U of L. And the executive budget provides $60 million, and in the same way that the same distribution that CPE recommended, 50 for UK and U of L, and $10 million for the comprehensive institutions. And competitive workforce initiative, that very bottom line, CPE recommended 2.2 million in the first year and about $4.5 million in the second year for competitive workforce initiative, which would go to KCTCS. That was funded in the House budget. It was not included as part of the executive budget. And this next couple of slides is about the CPE agency budget. Just a reminder.
Sean, before you move on, you might want to see if any of our council members have any questions at this point.
There's a lot of information.
Yeah.
I'll recap it here at the end maybe in a different format. Okay.
Go right ahead.
CPE agency budget, our base is $11.6 million. And you can see the distribution here. Agency operating funds, about 7.2 million. $3.6 million for the Technology Trust Fund, which funds the virtual library and our post-secondary education network. Ovarian cancer screening, we have $500,000 that's used for that out of our general fund dollars. SREP doctoral scholars, just a $50,000 program at UK and U of L, but a very good program, which we asked for additional funds for. And we pay the state's SREP dues, $214,800. So that's our $11.6 million base. So just a quick reminder of what our base funding is. And you see that CPE requested our base funding for the upcoming biennium in both years. And then we requested these additions. Defined calculations, these are our cost increases that the state identifies for us. And so we have to ask for those cost increases. Cost of living adjustment, the state asked us to ask for 1% in each year. And that's the funding associated with that, $19,300 in the first year, $77,600 in the second. we did ask for $50,000 in the first year and $100,000 in the second year to expand doctoral scholars. Currently, because UK and U of L matched that funding, with $50,000, we fund 4 individuals, and this would get us up to 12. So that was our request. Expanded duties and responsibilities. Because we've been taking on more responsibilities, we need to bring on more staff, and that's the funding associated with that. In the second year, we have a federal grant that, a private grant that will be no longer with us, and this is funding to keep those individuals on hand. That's the reason for the increase there. The education continuum request 1.3 in the first year and 3.3 in the second is for additional advisors and to improve early post-secondary opportunities, including dual credit. And that's just a piece of what the education continuum needs. And that was part of our request. And then finally, we had a healthcare initiative, $20 million in the first year, $20 million in the second year to help help the state come to terms with and improve the situation with regard to healthcare workforce shortages. And you can see we also requested $2 million for a student portal and $1 million for the regional optical network for just an upgrade of that network so it can take full advantage of Kentucky Wire. And the House budget included our base funding. It included defined calculations, and it included a 6% salary increase in that first year. And that increase happens throughout the year for our employees. And so that's why you see the value going up in the second year for that increase. Because by the second year, everyone will have that increase at the beginning of the year. So they did not fund the doctoral scholarship expansion, or they didn't fund additional duties and responsibilities. They did not fund the request for education continuum dollars. They did fund the healthcare initiative as we requested it. And there was funding for the regional optical network, $1 million. Very happy to see that. The student portal, however, did not get funding. In our meeting with the state budget director's office folks, they said, "We have good news to tell you. We've given you everything you asked for." So they did provide defined calculations, though they changed those numbers a little bit. They provided a cost of living adjustment 5% effective May 1st. So they took a different approach for that cost of living adjustment. They funded the expansion of SRP doctoral scholars, the additional staff. They also funded the education continuum. They funded the healthcare initiative, I believe, in the education and workforce, educational labor cabinet budget at $20 million, but without the focus on healthcare workforce in particular. So it was more of a broader workforce initiative. But that $20 million would be used for non-recurring, is my understanding, non-recurring expenses to increase capacity for programs that produce workers. So that was their approach for the workforce initiative dollars, and then the student portal and regional optical network were funded as we requested. Any questions about CPE's agency budget?
If I may, Sean, I'm just curious, and I don't know who the appropriate person is to respond to this, but the lack of any funding in the House initial budget proposal for the expanded duties, responsibilities, and the continuum is that, is there somewhere that's going to be made up? Because those seem to be things that we cannot and don't want to do without.
Well, Eric, I guess that's a question for me. And I want to be straightforward. You know, we're doing a lot of things that we, in fact, didn't have on our, we've never been funded for. The education continuum. We weren't funded for that, right? We were able to figure out a way through other resources to get it going for a couple of years. We weren't funded for the Student Success Collaborative and base funding, even though it's crucial to how we're moving the state forward, but we did get a James Graham Brown grant. So what's going to happen, your question, I think, is this. What's going to happen when James Graham Brown runs out? Well, we'll try to get hopefully new grants, but maybe not. But it doesn't become a part. I don't like getting grants unless I think I can make it a part of what we're doing and it's important to our agenda. We turn down grants all the time. The same way with the Ed Continuum, we know how important that is. We were the only people to ask for those dollars. Now, the elephant in the room, what about the KSU money? Well, the KSU money that we've spent now, which has been a whole lot, came out from salary savings of people that I should have hired, but didn't hire because we were in the COVID stuff. And so we used the money we saved that obviously is scheduled to be used, that you all have already approved, to be used in this coming year. So what does that mean? It means that we're going to have to either cut stuff out or figure out other ways of getting money. Our hope is that we can talk to the House more in the reconciliation budget and also talk with the Senate to talk about the importance of that. The healthcare initiative, I obviously would love to, if we get this money, is to hire someone with a broad-based understanding of healthcare and higher ed and K-12 to kind of help us to move this agenda along that's sorely needed. We've been able to get some resources from Baptist Health and other folks to kind of help us to do this, but we're going to have some resources to do that. And to do that is something different than we've never done, but we know how important that is to the higher ed agenda. So hopefully I'm answering your question okay with my scratchy voice, but those are the answers.
Yeah, thanks. I just see that as concern, particularly, well, I can't even say which is more important, but the KSU matter, had to be taken care of, and it's being taken care of very responsibly. And then the continuum, as you say, is proving to be so important to future planning. And so I hope we can see some changes there.
Well, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep pushing. The folks we have in the Ed Continuum so far, most of them are people that we've been able to move resources around, like Amanda and Jennifer, and those are permanent people no matter what. But it stops us from doing all the other things that we have put forth with the Ed Continuum that I know Luke has been a part of. That agenda would have to be put on hold once we run out of the money that we currently have.
I would like to add that the executive budget includes $23 million in the current year for KSU to respond to the financial crisis there. The House budget does not include any funding, but there is a separate appropriations bill that I'm sure Travis will talk about that would provide funding for KSU in the current year at $23 million.
Sean, if I might, and Dr. Thompson, if I might just jump in here real quick and talk a little bit about process too, because, unlike, this is the first time that we've seen the House propose a budget before the governor's budget, and they weren't necessarily privy to all the requests that we made. They didn't have all the information together when they pulled their budget together. So normally when we're looking at this, we're looking at an executive budget and a House budget that actually passes the House. This one obviously hasn't yet, and we expect that there will be a committee sub. Was actually had been scheduled to maybe even drop the end of last week, but some surely will be done probably this week. And so we'll get a more of an idea of the House's agenda when they pass that substitute. And, we may see some of these things pop back up in there. We've certainly been working on them. And I know Dr. Thompson and the rest of us have had a lot of conversation with legislature about some of the things that weren't included. So just wanted to make that note, because a lot of times when you're looking at this, it's the difference between, well, it's actually passed out of the House and what the governor's budget was. And that's not the case this time.
Very good point. As promised, just a different look at the same information. So executive and House budgets, the differences, operating funds, 50 million in each year for performance funding from the House as introduced, executive budget 67.5 and 90 million as base adjustments. Capital, the House had $700 million for asset preservation, UK and U of L matching at 25%, distribution based on square footage, executive budget $500 million. That's a typo. $500 million, 10% base, 90% VFA need, 50% match. And then new construction, the executive budget funds the top 2 projects at each university, top 3 projects at KCTCS. And then Bucks for Brains, the House, $30 million, but just UK and U of L. Executive, $60 million, all universities. And Workforce Development Trust Fund, no funding provided in the executive budget, but 2.2 million and 4.5 million in the House budget for 23 and 24. And then similar look at the agency budget, difference in salary adjustment. Other additions, the $20 million in healthcare workforce initiative is housed at CPE in the House budget. In the executive budget, that is housed elsewhere and doesn't have the healthcare focus. The executive budget funds expanded duties and responsibilities, funds the continuum request, and it funds the doctoral scholars expansion. And then finally, the executive budget funds both the Regional Optical Network project and the student portal, and the House only funds the Regional Optical Network. And a note on the Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority budget, the executive budget funds the Better Kentucky Promise Scholarship. And at a level, if you were to look at the Work Ready Scholarship, which is similar but much more confined to just a few areas. If you look at this Better Kentucky Promise as an expansion of that, currently we're spending $10.8 million a year for the Work Ready Scholarship. And this would be an increase of $9.2 million in the first year and $18.4 million in the second. And it would be a last dollar scholarship for students pursuing an associate's degree or below.
Very quick question, if we have time. On the previous slide for the base rate of increase proposed by the executive, maybe it's just my own confusion. So if it's not going into the performance-based funding, what exactly, just quickly, is the process for the distribution of those funds to the universities then? So
sure, great question. The budget office took the total general fund appropriation, which includes the performance distribution in this current year. So total general fund distribution, they subtracted debt service and mandated programs, and then each institution's share of total is the share that they receive of the $67.5 million in the first year and the share of the $90 million in the second year. So it is,
and
it
Sean,
is simple. And there's,
Sean, it was essentially an across the board 8.8% increase in the first year and an across the board 11.7% increase in the second year.
And that's an increase on the funds that they have available to educate students. So it's not an increase on the the total funds that go to the institution, just the general fund that can be used to educate students.
Okay, I appreciate it. I was just curious because in a time of COVID and these universities kind of navigating the way they're going to approach the next few years budget wise, it kind of seems smart, in my opinion, to say you're going to have this increase in money rather than, again, just their entire opportunity for increased budgetary assistance is going to be contingent on operating within the performance-based funding system, which a lot of schools did poorly before COVID even hit. But I guess so the house is just 50 million in performance-based funding. Okay. Thank you.
Well, Colby, I will tell you that campuses like KSU, Moorhead, Murray, and some of the others love the idea of some base funding increases because they haven't had any underperformance funding. Performance funding is the lay of the land now, though. My guess is that the House will make sure that if whatever they go along with the governor's budget, it'll be put in performance funding. But the governor basically, and he's very open about this, believes that the campuses have been cut for so many years, and the total amount of dollars being cut, performance funding hadn't served well on many of those campuses. So he believes we need to get back as close as we can to square one before a performance funding model is implemented. So every year so far that the governor has put money into higher ed, and that's now been 3 years in a row, it has been as base funding increase and not performance funding. Every year, though, that the House has gone back and put that money into performance funding.
Any more questions about the budget update? I know Travis Powell is having some technical difficulties. Would it be possible to, are you back?
Yeah, I'm doing my best. My computer has quit work. Zoom has quit working on my computer, so I am holding my phone and we'll do it now. So
we just finished the budget update. I think
Okay.
the next on the agenda.
okay, great. Well, the next item, and Dr. Thompson alluded to this, is House Bill 250, which is the Kentucky State University appropriation bill. And obviously, you didn't see the appropriation in the budget bill. It is in the governor's budget, I believe. Correct, Sean?
Yep.
Yes, but and with some language around the parameters under which those funds will be distributed. But the House treated it as a separate bill. The bill dropped the day after the budget bill was released. You have the information about the bill in your materials, but I'll go over it very quickly, and it's very short, and it'll look very familiar to you as it's very similar. The management improvement plan areas are very similar to the ones that you all approved, or the full council approved at its last meeting. To start off with the first item, the CP will create and oversee a management improvement plan for KSU. And again, the items are the same as the ones that were approved by you all. There's a few minor differences. One difference is they took out the organizational structure and development of human infrastructure item and included an item for student academic progress and results. And also, I'll note that these are not an all-inclusive list. It's including but not limited to the following. So we can certainly add to these, but these would be the responsibility to create and oversee by the council. So we may decide to include some additional ones to these, but these are the ones that are required by the statute. And again, much like our management improvement plan, the plan shall include specific measurable goals, objectives, and benchmarks for each of the improvement areas, and a process for monitoring the progress of KSU during the implementation and actualization of the plan. So also, CPE will provide on-site or third-party staff to assist with the management, advising, and administrative capacity to assist KSU in implementing the management improvement plan. So it's contemplated that CPE will have boots on the ground at KSU, similar to what we've had before, although in a much more direct and sustained way than what we've been doing during the executive order process that we've implemented. It requires that CPE submit the final management improvement plan to the Legislative Research Commission by November 1st, 2022. It allows us to submit revisions to the plan at any time to the commission after it's adopted. So this can be a fluid item if there are things that need to be modified or taken out or added to them at any time. We're not stuck with the plan that was adopted on November 1st, 2022. We can make changes to those. We wanted to make sure that flexibility was included. We're required to provide regular reports on June 1st and November 1st, 2022, and then each year, those dates on each year thereafter, will provide reports to the Interim Joint Committee on Education, detailing the status and implementation and the results of the plan, and also talk about repayment and loan forgiveness amounts too. I'll talk about that in a second. And then KSU is required in the next 3 years to provide at least 4 updates each year on the management improvement plan to various committees in the General Assembly. And there's several listed here in the bill. On November 1st, probably the biggest deliverable other than the management improvement plan itself is on November 1st, 2025. CP shall provide a 3-year performance analysis of KSU based on the management improvement plan to the Interim Joint Committee on Education, and Interim Joint Committee on Appropriations and Revenue. And as part of that plan, CP shall recommend for a transition plan to a new governance and operational structure for the institution to consider, for the General Assembly to consider, if we find that there's a continuing lack of efficiency and effectiveness in governance and administration of Kentucky State University. This is something that was very important in the drafting of this bill, and legislators wanted to see some sort of in a short time frame to CP to do an analysis to decide if we still should be going in this new direction or this current direction, or should we transition to a different direction, whether that be new governance, merger, transition, whatever the case may be. It's up to CP to make a recommendation. So obviously the next 3 years will be crucial if this bill were to be adopted. Finally, again, the $23 million is appropriated through this bill. This is a loan. It's a non-interest bearing loan. On that same date in November 1st, 2025, CPE shall make recommendations to those same committees about a repayment plan for the institution and any loan forgiveness amounts that we think should be applicable. So not only will we do the report on the management improvement plan, but we'll also recommend to the General Assembly how the institution should repay the loan and if any should be forgiven. The loan amounts will be placed in a loan repayment trust fund administered by CPE, and that's where the payments for the loan will be collected, and that'll be housed here at CPE. So anyway, this bill has an emergency clause. Obviously, if we're fortunate enough to have it passed or some version of it, it would go into effect immediately, because again, this is a current year appropriation for the institution. Which is what we requested. So one caveat I'll add, we are working on getting a fiscal note together for this bill. Obviously, as Dr. Thompson mentioned, we're going to need some resources to implement the requirements of this bill if it were to pass in its current form. And again, we've been using existing resources to sort of fill the gap during this short amount of time in the last 6 months or 7 months now that we've been doing this. But moving forward, if this is going to be sustainable, we're going to have additional funds in order to do this the right way, especially if we're going to have boots on the ground at the institution. So I'll stop now. That's an overview of the bill and pretty much all the provisions of it. If you have any questions, me or Dr. Thompson will be happy to answer for you.
Thank you, Travis. Any questions?
I would just hope that we make it clear that for this to go forward, there really does need to be additional revenue stream coming into CPE to accommodate and accomplish all of the goals that need to happen to make this university whole.
Thank you, Elaine. That's so true. But the other part that's really true, and I think Eric was going to that a minute ago, for us to continue doing what we're doing at CPE, and I feel very good about my staff doing what they're doing, we have been short-staffed even before this. So we took already short-staffed and devoted a lot of those staff, including myself a lot, and Travis and a variety of other people, and even hired some people as consultants with our money to do a lot of this work. So it's not just for us to help them to move forward. We really can't afford to spend any more of our money on continuing that effort much after. We'll do what we can do. I mean, there's some things don't cost us anymore, like Travis and me, but there are some things that cost us time, and that could be translated to money, I guess. But I appreciate that sentiment.
Okay. Any other questions? All righty. Let me get back to my agenda. I think the next item was tuition. I believe, yes, tuition same for the academic year. I believe Sean and Bill, that is also for you guys. There we go.
Thank you, council members, President Thompson. This is just an update. There are no action items related to this particular agenda item. And we thought it would be helpful just to remind council members that were here back in January and in May what was actually approved by the council. We may have a few new members that aren't aware of what was approved. So the first basic question is, what parameters did the council approve? And as most of you know, we approved a 2-year parameter for both 2021-22 and for 2022-23. And that approval took place on May 13th. And you can see the bulleted parameters listed there. For the universities, a maximum base rate increase of no more than 3% over 2 years and no more than 2% in any 1 year. For KCTCS, a maximum base rate increase of no more than $5 per credit hour over 2 years and no more than $3 per credit hour in any 1 year. In addition to those parameters which pertain to the increase in resident undergraduate tuition and fees, the council also approved non-resident undergraduate rates that either comply with the council's tuition and mandatory fee policy or adhere to the provisions of an existing memorandum of understanding between the council and an institution. And then finally, you approved market competitive tuition and fee rates for graduate and online courses. Next slide, Sean. So what did those parameters mean for the maximum base rates, which were also approved by the council? And what we're showing here in these two tables on the left, you have maximum 1-year base rate increases for resident undergraduates. On the right, a maximum 2-year base rate increases for resident undergraduates. And those maximum base rates are shown in green highlight. They're both compared to last year's 2021 base rates. And just to remind council members, a base rate is the total tuition and fee charge at a given institution, minus any special use fees or asset preservation fees previously approved by the council. And at KCTCS, it's minus their Build Smart agency bond fee. But at any rate, if you look at the table on the left, the maximum base rates for 2021-22, obviously, if you look at the 1-year dollar change and 1-year percent change, for the universities, they're capped at that 2% increase over that 1-year time period. And at KCTCS in the 1-year dollar change column, you can see KCTCS for 2021-22 was capped at a $3 per credit hour increase. Now, if you compare that to the table on the right, again, you're starting with the same 2020-21 base rate year. And then the maximum increase over 2 years is shown in green highlight. The 2-year dollar change at KCTCS is capped at $5. And then the 2-year percent change for each of the universities is capped at 3%. So that's what the council approved, and those highlighted green base rates for the first year and the second year of that 2-year cycle are the base rates that have already been approved. Next slide, Sean. So the next basic question we wanted to answer for you is, what base rates did the institutions adopt in the current year, 2021-22? And again, we're showing last year's 2021 base rates in the first column of the table on the left. The second column highlighted in purple are the adopted base rates that the institutions brought before the council for approval. As you can see in the footnote, that approval took place for all 9 institutions on June 25th, 2021. And you can see the dollar change and the percent change associated with those increases. All of those increases complied with the council approved ceilings. If you look at the percent changes for every university, they were either at 2% or below the 2% one-year cap. And as you can see, KCTCS chose not to raise tuition, so that obviously was below the $3 per credit hour increase cap for 1 year for KCTCS. KSU also chose not to increase tuition in 2021-22, and you can see that in this table. So overall, the system average increase for 2021-22 was 1.2% for resident undergraduate students. That is the second lowest system average increase in over 20 years. The lowest system average increase was actually in 2020-21, and that was a 0.7% increase. So, excuse me. So for the time period since President Thompson became president of our agency, tuition and fee increases have been at their lowest levels in decades. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
How does that line up with, I guess, the rate of inflation in Kentucky? It has to be relatively close with 1.2%, correct?
Well, it depends on what rate of inflation you're looking at. Are you looking at the consumer price index, or more appropriately, are you looking at the higher education price index? And that higher education price index has been hovering right around 2% and a 2.1% increase per year. So this is lower than the increases nationwide in the higher education price index.
And the consumer price index is a whole lot higher than that. So if you look at the regular rate of inflation, Bill, I think it's over 3% now and going up minute by minute. I don't know what it is now, Bill. What is it?
I just know it costs me a lot to go buy groceries.
Well, I just heard it. So it's getting up. It's over 3. It was over 3% when we did this. So the higher ed price index was over 2% when we did this. So we looked at inflation in setting our ceilings, but we wanted to make sure that people came in under that. And as Bill is probably going to tell you here in a second, because we set a 2-year rate, then most people, I mean, you won't see more than that this coming year or less. So we, once again, will set another record, I guess, with tuition increases. And when we get this funding, there's a good chance it'd even be less than that. So, so I think we've been very strategic as we've done this, as we think about this. So that's a good question, though.
To give a quick answer here, Colby, by the way, the most recent data is 2021, and it's 2.7%. And then the 5-year average is 2.6%.
Is that the CPI, Ryan?
It's the HEPI, Higher Education Price Index.
Yeah,
Okay, so it's gone up.
The all good CPI for last year was 7%.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, you're right. I was looking it up, Madison. You're on the ball today. Twice you've done that. I was just looking it up. It's over 7%. Yeah.
Okay, Sean, next slide. And this will get to a little bit about what President Thompson was just talking about. The table on the left shows revised maximum base rate increases for 2022-23. And the reason that we have to revise those rates for some institutions like KSU and KCTCS that had a 0% increase in the current year they are capped at KCTCS, for example, by the no more than $3 per credit hour charge in any 1 year. So the increase at KCTCS cannot exceed $3 per credit hour in any 1 year, and that's what's shown in yellow highlight there for KCTCS. So rather than being able to go up to that maximum 2022-23 base rate parameter that the council previously approved, which was $5 over 2 years, for the upcoming year, they're capped at that $3 per credit hour level. The same thing is true for KSU. They chose not to increase tuition in the current year. And so they're capped at the 2%, no more than 2% in any 1 year parameter for this upcoming tuition cycle. And then lastly, Murray State University is in that same situation as well. The base rate for the other 6 institutions are capped at the no more than 3% over 2 years. And of course, that's compared to last year's 2021 base rate. And those were the maximum base rates that were previously approved by the council. So the only base rates for 2022-23 that are going to change are at KSU, Murray, and KCTCS. And we're holding them to a lower increase based on the parameters that the council approved this past May. And this gets to what you were just saying, President Thompson, at the maximum allowable base rate increase, if every institution raised their maximum base rates to what's shown in this table on the left, that would be a system average increase of 1.6% for resident undergraduates. But given the amount of funding that's included in the executive budget and the House budget for higher education, we do not anticipate that every institution will go to that maximum base rate for the upcoming academic year. So it will likely be below that 1.6% in terms of the system average increase. Next slide, Sean. You've got 2 additional items in your packet. Attachment A is the council's tuition and mandatory fee policy, and attachment B is a copy of a preliminary 2022-23 tuition setting timeline. These are both drafts at this point. The tuition and fee policy, the only thing that has changed between what was adopted back in January of this year is that we changed the academic year from 2021-22 to 2022-23. As you may recall from that council meeting back in January, there were a few minor changes that were made to the asset preservation fee exception policy. And those were the only changes that were made at that time. Excuse me. Over the next few weeks, CPE staff will work with campus CBOs and presidents to identify any proposed changes to the tuition policy for 2022-23. And we'll bring those proposed changes, if there are any, at the April meeting of the council. Going to the next slide, Sean. In terms of the tuition setting timeline, given that the 2-year ceilings were adopted by the council, the timeline for this upcoming tuition cycle is more abbreviated than would normally be the case. And obviously that's because you've already adopted the tuition ceilings for 2022-23. And so there's no need to bring a tuition and fee recommendation before the council and have that approved for the 2022-23 cycle. Again, we're going to work with campus officials to identify any changes to the preliminary 2022-23 tuition setting timeline. We are anticipating that the policy and the timeline will be brought for council approval at the April 15th meeting. One other thing that we do anticipate, because the ceilings have already been set for the coming academic year, a number of institutions may want to bring their tuition and fee rate proposals for approval at the April meeting. If they can't make it by the April meeting, they of course can bring those proposals for council action in June. The one thing that we're asking the campuses to do, and that's included in the timeline, is that they get their respective governing boards to approve their tuition and fee proposals prior to submitting those requests to the council. And we're asking for those proposals by no later than close of business on April 5th. And so that's everything I had in terms of the update on the tuition and fee setting process for 2022-23. Does anyone have any questions?
Could we discuss, I just had some questions regarding the special use fee exception. Specifically in regard to, if I'm understanding it correctly, the special use fee exception goes into place if adopted in one of the three ways, I guess, votes from the student body or the student government. And so what it's specifically being used for, that has to be explained to the voting entity prior to its vote for enactment, correct?
Yeah. The uses of the fee revenue have to be communicated to students. And the basic purpose of the special use fee policy was to provide an avenue whereby students could come to the administration on campus and say, hey, we want to impose a fee on ourselves. And we want it to be for student activities, whether it be a new fitness center, whether it be a new tutoring center, a new soccer field, intramural soccer field, whatever the students decide, either as a student body or as a majority of the student government. They can come to the administration and propose a special use fee, and our policy does allow for an exception. And the exception is that the fee, when implemented, in the year implemented, would not be counted toward the tuition and fee ceiling for that year in which the fee is implemented. So if the institution is going to implement a 2% tuition and fee increase, and this new special use fee that was requested by students and approved by the campus administration, if it were to be imposed by the council, if it added another % increase in the total tuition and fees, that 1% would not count toward the 2% ceiling. So that's the purpose of the special use fee. And of course, the procedure is it has to be approved by the student body or by the student government. It has to be approved by the Board of Regents at each campus that would request a special use fee. And then the last step is that it has to be approved by the council.
And it has to be used for that item. And that's important because we've had situations where that's not taken place and we've had to rectify that. So that's the case, but the generating element here is that this is student driven, if you will, and not administrative driven or whatever the case may be. And that's the difference here. Now I will tell you, I know we're probably going to get a couple of those asked this time. And this finance committee is going to have to take a look at it, and I'll talk with Bill even more in detail and you all more in detail about this. But it is important that that we know. And in the past, I've dissuaded other presidents to bring it to the table unless it fit within the parameters, even though the policy says something a little bit different than that.
Again, this could be in here. I was trying to find it while you were explaining that. How long can that fee be imposed? So once voted on by the students, how long can it last? Could it last past where the students that voted for that fee have all graduated, and so now it's being imposed on students who had no say in its original enactment?
That has happened every time, actually, the latter part. I know of no time where it's been within the parameter of the students voting on it. Bill, am I correct? You're going to have to unmute yourself, sir.
Sorry about that. I was muted. Colby, to answer your question, the special use fee was intended to stay in effect for the life of the project. So if you financed a new fitness center or an expansion to the student union, that is a capital project. It's typically debt financed. And so for whatever the term of the debt is, typically 20 years, it was anticipated that the fee would remain in effect. And so it would continue after the students that voted for the special use fee are long gone from the university. I've got, I think, some language here. Let's see. Yeah, a plan is in place for the eventual reduction or elimination of the fee upon debt retirement, and details of that plan have been shared with students. The council does not expect a fee that qualifies for an exemption under this policy to be assessed at full rate in perpetuity. Such fees should either terminate upon completion of the debt, or in the case of new facilities, may continue at a reduced rate to pay for ongoing maintenance and operating costs. So the only way that it can continue beyond the life of the debt is if it's a new facility and there's maintenance and operating costs associated with that. Some portion of the fee could remain in effect to help pay for the M&O cost. But the council, when they adopted this exception policy, did not intend for these fees to continue in perpetuity. And they did not intend for these fees to be increased as part of the annual tuition and fee, percent increase in tuition. And that's why we back out the special use fees, we back out the asset preservation fees to get to a base rate, because those fees are to remain fixed. And as President Thompson said just a minute ago, the revenue from those fees are restricted funds, and they have to be used for the intended purpose.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, I'm not trying to come out in complete opposition of it. I just had some concerns on it, specifically in that it seems like the whole purpose is to ensure that the students on campus are collectively realizing, one, that mainly that it is something that is going to benefit their higher education experience. And so the two issues I had, one was the length, but I understand it would be very hard to convince any administration to pursue a project if they thought that it was going to potentially lose funding a few years later. So I understand that. My other concern too was not to compromise the legitimacy of my election, but I was the student body president at Moorhead, and it's not heavily participated in as far as elections go. And so I thought there was a lot of votes, but it was a small fraction of the student body that actually participated in the election, as is the case in every university across the state. It's very, very small proportion. And so I understand that there's 3 ways in order to vote in a policy. And the first one requires a majority vote campus-wide with at least 1/4 of currently enrolled students casting a ballot. But then the other 2 ways, whether it be the student elected representatives or a majority campus referendum, it doesn't seem that any of those other 2 avenues have a minimum participatory requirement, which again concerned me, because if you're going to impose a fee, for example, a lot of the students that it could affect, we found it very, very difficult to find any non-traditional students to participate on student government, for example, because those students typically are working another job or have families or have other obligations. So we found very, very little participation in student government voting, representation, and otherwise from non-traditional students who a small even fee could affect their ability to pay for their higher education. So I just am concerned that, again, the other 2 ways to vote in a fee under this route do not require any minimum participation, if that makes sense.
I understand. And one reason we share the draft tuition and fee policy at this stage in the process with our council members, in addition to campus chief budget officers and campus presidents, is that council members can bring a proposal to make a change in the tuition and fee policy. It's your policy. So if that's something that you want to put on the table, Colby, just send an email to me and Sean, copy President Thompson, and we'll put that on the table for discussion with the campus CBOs and presidents.
Colby, your point is a point that I made years ago when this was passed. At that time, I was executive VP and and of course I was advisor to student government for a long time. And the argument that I made was that that a campus representative vote is still different than a campus Senate vote. Even though the Senate represents the body, fairly often senators are voted in with very few numbers, right? So, at that time, they decided to use those three methodologies. I think the most often methodology has been used is on a campus Senate vote. I think that's the way it was when I think you were president of Moorhead at the time this was voted in for Moorhead. Am I right? So there is. Now, there have been times where they have taken, I can remember Mike Benson did it when he was president of EKU on an issue that I asked him to get a full campus vote on something. And I forgot exactly what that is, but he did. And it came to that favor still. But I think your point is a well-taken point in my book.
I appreciate it. And again, not moving away from that, I don't want to keep everyone from getting back to the rest of the day. I had one question that moves away from this policy per se. It fell under the asset preservation fee exception policy. And I have no arguments against that exception. My only question was, it says that in a given academic year, the impact of implementing the asset preservation fee when combined with tuition and fee increase supporting campus operations will be reasonable for Kentucky students and families. I was just curious if the CP had a policy for assessing what is reasonable for the Kentucky students and families, or if it's a judgment kind of discretionary call. And if there is a policy for it, for determining what's reasonable, if I could get access to that. Again, sorry for being so contrary. And
and I'll respond to that, Colby, and it's right there in the policy that the council shall determine whether proposed asset preservation fee in combination with a tuition and fee increase allowed under the council approved tuition ceiling is reasonable. So, board members are, this body, the finance committee and the full council determines, depending on what the circumstances are at the time, in terms, what's the level of general fund support? Is there going to be asset preservation funding? We're anticipating, that this upcoming biennium, we are going to have some asset preservation funding. There is going to be, at least in the House budget, a $50 million performance funding appropriation for operating funds each year. And in the governor's budget, $67.5 million, $90 million, respectively, in each of the upcoming 2 years for operating funds. That impacts tuition and fee setting. So we bring that information to the council, and the finance committee and the full council determine what is reasonable in terms of adopting an asset preservation fee in any given academic year. And it also depends on, what was the level of tuition and fee increase last year at the institution? What are they proposing for this upcoming year, just in terms of tuition and fee increase? And then how much is that asset preservation fee going to add to the total tuition and fee charge to a student? So there's a number of circumstances that come into play. And so it almost has to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. But the council is the ultimate arbiter of whether or not an asset preservation fee gets adopted.
Okay, that answered my question. So again, by that understanding, then it will be up to us as a council, the finance committee and the full council, to even determine what factors we're going to consider, correct? So we can take the suggestions from CP staff, but theoretically, not this council, I'm not making any accusations they would do so, but say a future council had affordability less on the mind, or they thought that affordability was already obtained, they could theoretically consider none of the factors just said, because there's no binding factors that must be considered by the council when making their determination, if I understand correctly. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. I believe that was all the items that we had on the agenda. If there's any, I'll open the floor for any last questions, comments. And or Heather, keep me honest. I'm just following along. I don't believe there's any other items we need to cover.
I think you're good. It's up to anybody else.
All right. Well, any last questions, comments?
Luke, I move that we adjourn. If
A
that's
motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion by Mr. Nelson, second by Mr. Ferris. All in favor, you can end the Zoom call.
See
Have a
y'all.
good
Thank you
week,
all very
everyone.
much.
Thank you.